What is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This episode number 550. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line, all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's waiting for him to finish drinking his water, Luis Scott-Vargas. Dude, that was
What's
a
up?
big chug. You thirsty?
Yeah. I was showing Marshall. I come armed for bear here. I've got a 32-ounce mason jar full of ice, water, and limes, and it's really hot here in Denver. And just took the dog out. I just want to make sure I don't get dehydrated. So
Is it really hot?
Yeah, it's been in the 80s to 90s most of the days here.
Whoa!
So.
I didn't know it was that hot. Wow, you're back in California.
It's actually in some cases days hotter here.
Yeah, that's crazy. All right, so this week on the show, we've got M21 format guide. So we're going to kick things off, first impression style, look into what we've got here for the big picture view on this format and how you should be approaching it when you sit down to play limited in it. And we've got a lot to say. So excited for this week. Before we get into it, let's talk about our sponsor, channelfireball.com, specifically Channel Fireball Pro. CFB Pro has limited content. Luis, what do we got there?
Well, it always had some limited content, but we actually got feedback. We did some rounds of surveys, and we got the feedback. Hey, I'd love to see more limited content. So we really kind of stepped up our game there. First of all, my initial set reviews came out as always, but then we've added two new limited writers. Christian Calcano, who's Pro Tour Top 8, Platinum Pro. He wrote his draft overview of course, set 2021. That's on the pro side, and then on the free side, we've got Alex Nikolic, who's and actually a longtime listener. He's Court of Calls on most social platforms, does the Limited Level Ups podcast, and wrote for Draft Sim. And I really liked his Ikoria breakdown. So luckily, I was able to pick him up, and he wrote his first article, an in-depth early look at M21, and that's on the free side. So definitely advise you to check out both of those articles. I think they're quite good. Also, I put up 2 draft videos this week, and we're really focusing on trying to provide alongside deck guides for basically all the decks that in standard and a lot of decks in other formats, a good chunk of content for limited, which of course want to emphasize for those who are listening to Limited Resources. And it doesn't hurt that M21 is a pretty sweet draft format. Even for a core set, it's on the slightly more complex side, I think, in terms of kind of what's going on and the keys to victory. So a lot of sweet content, both on the pro and free side. Videos are always free. So Channel Fireball really has everything you need when it comes to limited, regardless of what you're interested in.
There you go. And I'll put a link to Alex's article in the show notes. And then there's also a link in there for how to sign up for CFB Pro if you're interested in that. And that'll get you access to Calcano's article, as well as a bunch of other awesome strategic stuff from CFB Pro. Also, the show, of course, is brought to you by you via the Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/limited resources if you want to support the show. We really appreciate everybody who takes the time to do so. It's scalable. You can do it however you want, whatever fits your budget, and you'll get a thank you card in the mail and some cool free perks, or I shouldn't say free, some cool perks on the Patreon as well, depending on what level you sign up for. And again, that's patreon.com/limited resources. So let's get into our Crack-A-Pack, which I have here, another virtual Crack-A-Pack, because once again, we've got another set that's come out and I have yet to actually see a booster pack of it. So our opening card here is, it looks like we've got a foil makeshift battalion, which you can play. I have definitely died to makeshift battalion in the format.
It's funny, in the set review, I asked, because this is a reprint, how many times do you actually get a counter on this? And you're like, yeah, that just doesn't happen. And it was true in the formats this was in before. That is not true in this format. There's multiple playable 1-drops at common, which is really what this card needs to pop off. So obviously we're going to hope not to take makeshift battalion first, but it's still a pretty good card. It's overperformed. Yeah,
I died to 12-11 trampoline makeshift battalion yesterday, so you can do that. Silent Dart. I have actually yet to see one of these cast yet in the format. That's the 1-mana artifact that you can pay 4 mana, tap it, and sack it to do 3 damage to a creature. Just a little too inefficient to make the deck most of the time. Next is Keen Glide Master, which is 1 and a blue for a 2/1. You can pay 2 and a blue to give a creature flying until end of turn. pretty good. You know, you and I tend to like cards that are good early, good late, and this card's okay early, okay late, and that ends up to being okay, fine. You know, you can definitely dump mana into that 2 and a blue to throw your biggest creature at them a couple of times in the mid to late game or in a stall out, and that means that your 2-drop actually matters. Now, as a 2-drop, it's not amazing. It's just a little 2/1, doesn't do a whole ton on itself, but I have found this card playable for sure.
Yeah, I have definitely lost to this card and won with this card where it's actually funny because it's a 2-drop that, yeah, it's, again, fine on turn 2. That's part of why you put it in your deck is when they play an Alpine Watchdog, you can play this and block. Yep. But I've definitely lost and won with this card in the situation where you're on 5 mana or so, 6 mana, and you go, play this, make your 3/3 a flyer, hit them with maybe 2 flyers. Next turn, you're going to be able to double activate this. It really shortens the length of the game if your opponent can't get rid of it. It threatens to deal, 3 to 6 damage in the air, and some of that immediately, which is a pretty good ability. So the Glidemaster is, it's been performing. Not overperforming, but it's been performing.
Yeah, definitely playable. Next is Revitalize. That's the 1 and a white instant. You gain 3 life and draw a card. Sure, you can put this card in your deck for sure. There are numerous cards that care about gaining the life, and if you have those, then this card just slots right in.
Yeah, it's fine. I haven't found the life gain decks to be that good, but it's definitely playable in the life gain decks, and it's not a disaster if you play it outside of them.
Exactly. Crypt Lurker, interesting one. That's the 3 and a black 3/4, and when it enters a battlefield, you may sacrifice a creature or discard a creature card, and if you do, you draw a card. This has been an important enabler for the Reanimator deck, which we'll touch on here today for sure. When you don't have the better ways to get cards in your yard, this is a perfectly good one. And it's common, and it's not a particularly high pick, so you can usually pick them up. But I was drafting a Reanimator deck that had 3 Rise from the Grave, and I couldn't find a Looter or a Teferi's Protege or anything to save my life. And I ended up with 2 of these, and that really helped. I mean, seriously, this discarding, some big creature is a big deal.
Well, one of the cool things about the Crypt Lurker is that it helps you kind of enact your game plan, right? Which is to discard a Spine, a Megalodon, or a Gormand or whatever to reanimate. But it does so while actually putting you on the board. When you play against a red-white deck and you cast this on turn 4, it's going to either eat a pump spell, keep them from attacking, or eat a removal spell. But there's actually not that many removal spells that can even touch it. You can't get Scorching Dragonfire or Shocked out of the way. You're not attacking with it very often, so Swift Reckoning is not an answer. It's a pretty good wall, and then you finish the game with whatever giant thing you reanimate. So I've played up to 3 of these in a Reanimator deck and been very happy with it. This card has moved up in my estimation.
Definitely. And you're not down cards. Normally when you see discard a spell, basically, it really goes down because you're like, well, I'm discarding a spell, but I have a chance to draw a land, and I wouldn't necessarily want to do that. But here it actually works out because you do want those creatures in your yard. Next is Tome Anima. This is the 3 and a blue 3/3. It can't be blocked as long as you've drawn 2 or more cards this turn. I have not had success with this particularly, and I haven't really lost to it much. Do you have a take on Tome Anima?
Nah, it's just not good. I think that the blue-red spells deck or the blue-green draw 2 deck doesn't want this. It's just not good enough defensively or good enough offensively to merit how much you pay. And it does, in fact, die to Scorching Dragonfire.
Indeed. Next is Run Afoul. That's the green instant, just green mana. Target opponent sacrifices a creature with flying. Haven't played with that and certainly not picking it here. Another sideboard card, Return to Nature. 1 and a green instant. Choose 1, destroy an artifact, enchantment, or exile a card from a graveyard. No. Radiant Fountain. We should talk about this one. When a new set, particularly when a new set comes out, Luis and I get a lot of, on social media, a lot of people saying, what do you think about my deck? Or check out this deck, or I went 7-0 with this, or whatever. And one thing that I have seen pop up a few times that was a little alarming is the frequency with which people put Radiant Fountain in their deck where it has really no function. I would not do that. I view that as like a major cost.
So here's I think like a mini level up, which is the 8-9 mana base that we're accustomed to is not a good mana base.
Yes.
It's actually a lot worse than you think. It's standard because most formats don't have that many lands, and this is just what you end up in. But it's bad, and it's part of the reason that I take the dual lands in this in this format fairly high because, when you're blue black, having two dismal backwaters could easily just be the difference between getting to cast spells in a game versus not, especially when you're talking double colored spells.
Right.
Now,
which there are a
so
lot
to put Radiant Fountain in your deck just because you want 2 life, unless you're playing monocolored, you just should basically never do that. And even though there's a life gain theme, the life gain theme in the set, almost all the payoffs key off gaining 3 life. Mm-hmm. So Radiant Fountain doesn't even get you there. Yeah. I've actually not wanted to even play this card in the life gain deck. So
agreed.
I believe the average person's win percentage would go up if they just treated this card as a blank and never put it in their deck.
Yeah, a quick exercise you can do to kind of get a better understanding on how our mana bases and limited are compared to, like, say, constructed, is to do a comparison. Look at a constructed deck, like a 2-color constructed deck, and that has a similar ratio of mana, meaning like number of lands per, in the deck, and take a look at how many sources of each color they actually have versus how many you get as a percentage. And you'll be like, oh, like most of their lands produce both colors that they need. And then they feel comfortable. And for us, we might get a dual land and we feel like, yeah, baby, super solid mana. So keep that in mind that I think the ideal mana base in limited is probably a little over 16 lands, not 17, but we have to hedge that way so we have enough sources to make sure we hit our mana. And, you would want, like, another good example would be Cube. Look at some of the great Cube mana bases you can put together with all the duals there. Those are good mana bases. Ours are not. So Radiant Fountain really does have a big cost, and you shouldn't be playing it very often, if ever. Next is Rousing Reed. That is 2 and a blue for an enchantment, and it enchants a creature. When it enters the battlefield, you draw 2 cards, then discard a card, and the creature gets flying and +1/+1. It's a powerful card.
Yeah, it's one of the cool things, by the way, about seeing different people's perspectives. Calcano has this as the best blue common.
Okay.
Look. Like Calc likes this over Roman Ghostlight, which I myself don't endorse, but it shows how powerful this card is. Of course, we all know Calcano loves the aggressive decks and actually has a predilection for aura decks like the Slitherblade deck or the Red Black Auras deck in Ixalan.
Yeah.
But Rousing Reed is a card that, first of all, draw 2, discard 1 is not terrible. That's a fine little exchange. And giving a creature +1/+1 in evasion, especially with like all the prowess creatures in the set, or you put on a big green creature, or Spined Megalodon plus Rousing Reed. I've actually finished quite a few games based on that, where you put it on the 5/7 hexproof, and then your opponent could never win. You've got a 6/8 flying hexproof. So
right.
Rousing Reed is the best card we've seen so far. I would take it over Crypt Lurker, and be not thrilled to first pick this card, but not actually as unhappy as you might think. I found the card to be pretty good.
Well, let's see if we can improve on that a little bit. Our first uncommon is Experimental Overload. Bingo, baby. There's an improvement. It's 2 blue-red for a sorcery. You get an XX blue and red weird creature token, where X is the number of instants and sorceries in your yard, and then you can return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand, and then you exile Experimental Overload. That card's been great.
Oh, yeah. Experimental Overload is as good as we thought it was. Yeah. We looked at this, we're like, yeah, this card's going to be good. And guess what? Also very good.
It has been really excellent. Yeah.
It helps that blue-red spells, like, it's kind of like part of the reason I'm not super high on Revitalize is that I haven't found the life gain decks to be that good.
Yeah.
Experimental Overload is not only a powerful card, but blue-red spells is very good. It might be the best deck or the second best deck, something like that. Yeah. So I think that Overload is a card I'd be thrilled to first pick, and I have done so many times.
There you go. So there's our current front runner. Next, a card I have yet to get a chance to play in the format, but really want to. It's our old friend Lore Scale Coatl. That's the 1 blue-green 2/2, but whenever you draw a card, it gets a +1/+1 counter. Have you had a chance to run out the snake yet?
Oh, yeah. If you've never put Setessan Training or Rousing Reed on Lore Scale Coatl, you haven't lived.
That's insane.
It has multiple combos there, a lot of ways to draw extra cards in blue-green, and even by itself, it's a 3-mana 2/2, then on your turn it becomes a 3/3, and the next turn's a 4/4. Like, that's not weak by itself, and this card can just become a 7/7 very quickly. I would take Experimental Overload over Lore Scale Coatl, pick one, pack one, but the Coatl is certainly the second best card in the pack.
And that's because you like the blue-red deck better than the blue-green deck? Or
both I like the blue-red deck better, and I think Experimental Overload has a higher high end. I think Coatl on average can be very solid, and sometimes Overload can actually miss. I've had blue-red decks that don't pick enough Scorching Dragonfires and Shocks. Those are some of the really important cards to make this the overload tick. Mm-hmm. It's not actually that good with a bunch of Turn to Slags, and Turn to Slags is also just not that good. So
it's true.
You don't want to end up with too high of a curve with overload because it's already expensive. But the high end on overload is much, much higher than the Quaddle, because at the end of the day, Quaddle, you play it and then you kill it with Swift Reckoning or Shock or Scorching Dragonfire or Capture Sphere. Any of these removal spells, you even if you sunk a bunch of resources into it, you don't end up with a whole lot.
Yeah. Last uncommon is Unsubstantiate. 1 in a blue, instant, return target spell or creature to its owner's hand. Sure. I think I played this once. It was fine. But certainly not on par with the Quaddle or the Overload. God, I keep calling it Overlord for some reason. The Overload. Okay, well, never mind all that stuff. Our rare, or should I say mythic rare, is Terror of the Peaks. Fine. 3 red for a 5/4 flying dragon. Spells your opponents cast at target it, make them lose 3 life, or they cost an additional 3 life to cast. And whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, Terror of the Peaks deals damage equal to that creature's power to any target. So, yeah, all right. We had some fun there, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a Terror of the Peaks, not remotely.
Yeah, I mean, this is in the running for best card in the set.
Right.
And it's obviously going to be the pick. If it wasn't here, I'd take the Experimental Overlord, but I would... I would obviously be happy to take Terror of the Peaks either way.
Oh, God. Yeah, same. I haven't actually opened one of these in real draft. I wish I had. I would be pretty happy to have one of those. I've had some pretty nice stuff. I've gotten lucky with a lot of my opens, but I haven't had that particular one. Okay, so Terror of the Peaks. It is for our Crack-A-Pack. Let's jump into our format overview here. Big picture, Luis, what does the format look like?
So big pictures, it's fast, and look, one of the go-to limited memes is Paul Rietzel's,
I love this.
Day 1, the format's great. Day 2, the format's tempo based. Day 3, there's too many bombs. Day 4, he did week 1, 2, 3, and 4. Week 4, this format's boring. So
yeah. Well, and don't forget, you have to slot in green is unplayable in there somewhere.
Right. But this format is actually quite fast. It is a fast format. They're, the 2 drops are at a premium, and if you mess around too much, you can get run over. The cool thing though is synergy is also fairly high. Like I would say medium compared to an average set, high compared to a normal core set. Where
definitely.
It's possible to draft high synergy decks. The pick orders, like I put in my later, we're going to see the top commons for each color, and something like Opt is one of the top 3 blue commons, which is not something you would generally guess, especially since I believe you gave it an F in the set review. Is that
right? Come on, man! Oh God, one tweet.
But the format has enough synergy stuff, which changes your pick order and can make some cards overperform. That stuff is really cool. That I think really strikes to how deep and replayable a format is. The blue-black reanimator deck's a great example of this. Mm-hmm. And the stats on creatures matter a fair amount. Cards like Short Sword end up being pretty good as a result. The aggro decks have some good long game plans as well, and then you can do some really powerful stuff. The blue-red deck can, recur the same spell multiple times with both Experimental Overlord and the Shipwreck Dowser. You've got, you've got blue-black reanimating just awesome things, and you have people who can just curve out with Drowsing Pteranodon into Basri's Acolyte and attack you with 2 4/4s on turn 4.
Yeah,
this is the kind of thing that really is possible in this format. So
yeah,
the headliner here is that you need to be on the board quickly, whether that's defensively or offensively.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely learned that lesson early. I tried to draft some blue-black control decks, and there's some really powerful options in these decks. Some decent removal, Grasp of Darkness, and then you get the Ghostlight and stuff. So there's some really nice stuff to make a control deck. But I realized pretty quickly that my mana curves were way too high for the format. I needed stuff to do on turn 1 and 2, not necessarily as much on turn 4 and 5. And there were many times where my opponent was able to deploy basically their whole hand, by turn, say, 7 or 8. and I would have 4 or 5 spells still in my hand, and I would die. And it wasn't that my opponent's deck was amazing or anything. A lot of their spells were fairly mediocre, but you know where they were? They were on the battlefield, and mine were stuck in my hand. So I've been adjusting my pick orders and curve considerations downward basically every draft I've done. I have a lot of respect for the format as far as doing stuff early rather than dirtling around too much.
And the cool part is that doesn't mean you have to be beat down. This isn't Amonkhet where every color pair was beat down in some form or fashion. It's possible to draft controlling / comboing blue-red or blue-black decks or black-white or green-black decks. Like those are all on the kind of like controlling side of things. And that it just means you have to be prioritizing your cheap removal spells, your Deathspore Thalids and Drowsing Pteranodons and Shocks and Scorching Dragonfires and Swift Reckonings, because your opponent will be attacking you and they will be putting pressure on you. So you just have to kind of keep that in mind. This isn't one of those core sets where you're worried about how you're going to close out the game. You're where you want to pick win conditions and 5-mana removal spells. Those cards, the priority level on those has gone down as this format has evolved.
Yeah, especially, and we can get into more details, but the cheap interactive cards for the aggressive or, creature beatdown based decks are quite strong too. A card that we'll talk about as Feat of Resistance is a good example of, like, that kind of sums up a lot of how I see the format, right? If you're the control deck and you're thinking you're going to use your 5-mana removal spell to kill their thing and they go Feat of Resistance, it's just like, wow, like I needed that to go. That was on their biggest creature. Now their creature's bigger. I just spent 5 mana. They spent 2. So they may very well have played a 2-drop or a 3-drop that same exact turn. And now I'm so far behind that even if I have a really great hand, I can't deploy it in time to actually win. And these type of transactions happen fairly frequently. So, I've come up on cheaper cards that are on the board, like Putrid Imp and stuff like that, where I can actually interact by playing something that only costs 2. Fetid Imp, not Putrid Imp. And even though it's a worse card, at least, at first blush than a 5-mana removal spell or something like that. But so that to me kind of sums up how I've seen the format. And the other thing I wanted to add to back up the point you made about like the Pteranodon and stuff. I felt that almost all of the little tricks and little, like, if you do this, then it gets good. You can do those. Like, there's sometimes you see those in a set where you're like, yeah, that just never actually happened, or it's just too much work. That doesn't seem to be the case here. The little things, like that Pteranodon attacks a lot. Like, there's tons of ways to get a counter on it, or get another thing and just beat down with it. The card's awesome.
Yeah, one of the things that actually really, what your statement kind of, I think, reminds me of is that there are some sets where there's a lot of traps. There's like almost no traps in M21 in terms of cool things that are actually not supported. Origins was the worst at this, I think, that I can remember, where it had all these build arounds and none of them worked.
Yes.
Whereas, I think that maybe the life game theme is a little light. Like I haven't really fully sunk my teeth into that one, but in general, the little cards that say, hey, if you do a little work, I'm good. They're just all good because it's easy to kind of get the cards that combo with it if you know what those are.
Exactly. Okay, so how do you want to break down the decks, the archetypes as they stand right now?
So we're going to get into specific archetype guides over the next couple weeks. But the first thing I want to do is here's the spectrum, the way I see it. And of course, Marshall, if you disagree here, chime in. I just wrote this out of aggro to control for not only the 10 color pairs, but I actually think I have something like 12 here because 2 of the color pairs I see actually being able to diverge and go 2 different directions. Mm-hmm. So the most aggressive deck, I believe, is the red-white deck. This is like red white, and it's just red white beats. It doesn't necessarily go super wide because there's not good token making, but it still wants to curve out. This is the deck that plays both the 1-drops, the Staunch Shieldmate and the Anointed Chorister. Basri's Acolyte is just the best card for this deck. The 2 white 2/3 lifelink that distributes 2 +1/+1 counters. It's Alpine Houndmaster, the red white legend that can go get the Cur and the Alpine Watchdog is really important too. That card's pretty sick. It's great for aggression and for attrition. It actually does both those things by getting you a 3 for 1.
Yeah.
You end up just trying to play 1-drop into 2-drop into either like 3-drop or double spell on turn 3 or 4 or something like that, it of course will pick up as many like Scorching Dragonfires and Feet of Resistances as it can get. Short Sword's good in the deck, and it doesn't have too much room on the top of its curve. You don't see it playing a lot of copies of Turn to Slag or Pitchburn Devils. It would rather play like 16 land or 15 if you have a low enough curve, and finish off with like Gale Swooper, that kind of card more than any of the 5s. And so that's like generally the most aggressive, but it's not far behind as green-white +1/+1 counters, which again, Balthazar's Acolyte's still the best card in this deck too. And really looking to play Drowsing Pteranodon. The Pteranodon's nuts in this deck. That's the 2-mana 3/3 that has to have 4 power, or you have to have a creature with 4 power for it to attack, but it looks at itself. Whenever my opponent goes Forest, Plains, Pteranodon, I assume I'm getting attacked in the next turn or two.
Agreed.
And they basically always have it, whether it's Defiant Strike or Hunter's Edge or Short Sword or Bazu's Acolyte or Setessan Training. It always attacks. It's just a 2-mana 3/3 in the deck. Yes. And you end up, trying to curve out. The green is mainly for Pteranodon, though Hunter's Edge is fine. Llanowar Visionary actually drops, even though I have that as the best green common. I think it is worse than Pteranodon in this deck by a lot.
Yeah,
just because
go ahead. Because you want.
I was going to say because the deck is so good at mobilizing it.
Yeah, it's interesting because a situation you might find yourself in is your opponent goes turn 2 Pteranodon and then passes the turn to you, and let's say you have 2 swamps and a Grasp of Darkness, right? In a normal set, you'd be like, I'll take my chances, or I'll kill the 4 powered creature so the Pteranodon can attack. And here it's like, not only do you kill the Pteranodon, you do it now before they get to untap with their stupid Feet of Resistance or whatever. Like, that's respect, right? Like a conditional card that may not even be able to attack the whole game. I'm like the same as you. I'm planning for it attacking next turn. So, kill it right away. Yeah. And that's respect,
Yeah. And so this deck's much heavier white than green, but again, the Pteranodon and Hunter's Edge are both pretty good for the deck. Plus there's some uncommons that can kind of deliver. So, and of course the Conclave Mentor, the green-white Legend is great in the deck too. The Winding Constrictor reprint.
The uncommon. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and then I think the next most aggressive deck is the Blue-Red Spells aggro deck. And this is when you have a Blue-Red Spells deck that's playing, Spellgorger Weird and Experimental Overload, but has like Chandra's Magmut, Riddle Form, Jeskai Elder, and, maybe multiple copies of Frost Breath, is not looking to read the tides and get and draw a bunch of cards or Rain of Revelation quite as much, but can kind of kill you out of nowhere by curving out and then having multiple removal, bounce, or Frost Breath cards in a row. Mistral Singer, also the 2/2 Flying Prowess. All these cards are pretty good in the deck. Part of the strength of Blue-Red, why I think the deck is so good, by the way, is that you don't know which Blue-Red deck you're playing against. And if you get it wrong, sometimes you can get pretty punished. Because go back to the Grasp of Darkness example. If your opponent plays like a Chandra's Magmut on turn 2, the 2/2 that pings the opponent, like, if you're playing a blue-black kind of control deck, you probably grasp it on turn 2. But if you're playing against a deck full of Spellgorger Weirds, maybe you don't want to.
Right.
And then it turns out that they really care about that extra 6 damage it dealt you, and you just get mised out, by Frost Breaths when you're like, I wish I just killed their kind of dorkier 2-drop and not tried to save removal for their more threatening creatures. So
that happens a lot. And you mentioned Riddle Form quickly. That's a really tough one to deal with that, you need instant speed removal for most of the time. And that's where you really wish you still had your Grasp of Darkness, because that thing smashes.
Yeah. And Rousing Reed's very good in this deck. This deck is less likely to play like the high end. And again, is more concentrated on low to medium curve cards and has a lot of aggression. And this deck can be pretty fast. Blue-white flyers can also be. So basically red, white, and green are definitely the most aggressive, fastest. Then there's a little bit of a jump with blue-red spells aggro and also blue-white flyers, where you end up with basically just as many flyers as you can get, some defensive ground creature. This is the Warded Battlements deck, the 0/3 that gives all your attacking creatures +1/+0. This is the deck where that card really shines. And this deck can... it also can use Frost Breath, which is a card which I found to be quite good in this format overall. This deck, the blue-white deck, can be controlling, but I think in general it's going to be aggressive, where it has kind of all these unblockable creatures, but it's not really trying to kill your stuff as much as just win the race with its flyers and kind of out tempo you.
Yeah, you mentioned the battlement. I mean, there's times where you play it, get in for a hit right away, get in for one more hit with its bonus, and then even chump block with it, and you can still win.
Yeah, it can easily deal 2 to 3 damage a turn, which is pretty good for a 3-mana card. This next deck. The next 2 decks are decks that I haven't actually found come together all that much, but I've lost to them. Black-white life gain aggro. So this is the black-white life gain kind of nominally, but really is just playing the good aggressive white creatures plus like Deathspore Thallid and black removal. And it might have like Veto, the Thorn of the Black Rose, that rare, which is really good, which drains you every time you gain life.
Yeah.
Silver Smote Ghoul. That kind of thing, but it's still just effectively a white aggressive deck. It's got a low curve, small creatures, and removal spells to back it up. Demonic Embrace is a huge reason to be in this deck as well, because it goes really nicely on all the white creatures. That's the +3/+1 and flying enchantment that keeps coming back. Red Black Sack is actually a deck that makes me kind of walk back an earlier statement, which this actually is kind of a trap. I haven't found Red Black Sack to really deliver. It has some of the tools it needs. It has, Pitchburn Devils and Goblin Arsonist and Havoc Devil, the 2/1 Trampler that can sack. And there's an uncommon Threaten. But overall, I really haven't seen this deck come together very often. And so I wasn't sure exactly where to put it. I'm putting it on the kind of medium aggressive side, where it's like slightly more aggressive than controlling. But I don't really know how often you're supposed to be in this deck. If there's 10 color pairs, it feels like this might be one of the last ones for you to end up in. And maybe just a generic black-red control deck is a little stronger. I'm not sure.
Yeah, the only time that I've had experience with the red-black deck was playing against it. I haven't had it myself. I haven't felt incentivized to go that direction at all, because I'm not going to pick the gold uncommon, the pirate, the Direfleet Warmonger super early. Like when I see the experimental overload, then I'm like excited about getting that card, or even like an indulging patrician to try it out. A lot of these I really like, but the Warmonger, I'm like, whatever, maybe I'll pick it up. The only time that I've played against it and I thought, wow, that deck's actually really sweet, I recognized after the fact that was hinged off of 3 or maybe even 4 uncommons that my opponent showed me that game. And I'm like, okay, so there's something there, but if you need Direfleet Warmonger plus the uncommon Threaten, which I can't remember the name of, you need a couple of those. Trader's Greed, you need 2 of those. Okay, that's 2 uncommons. Remember, there's like 70 uncommons in these sets now. Like, you don't see these with you see uncommon cards with the same frequency, but not the same. You won't see the repeats as often as you did a few years ago because they changed that. That to me kind of says it all, right? Yeah, there's something there and you can do it, but if it leans on having uncommons, that means it's not really consistent. You're not going to see it that often.
Yeah, I have not found it to really come together. Yeah. So kind of need a little more data there, but my guess is it's not gonna be one of the heavy hitters in the format. A really good example that you used. You see the black-red uncommon. Are you excited to take it? The answer, no. And again, I put a lot of stock into how you like kind of unconsciously feel when you look at these cards. I see Experimental Overload, and I'm just like, bingo. Yep. I see the Direfleet Warmonger, and I'm like, yeah, I'm good. I think I'll take something else. Red Green Monsters is again not the most aggressive, but it can pressure the opponent, especially if it's got enough Drowsing Pteranodons. It's trying to use, Garrett's Uprising to draw cards, or Furious Rise.
Yep.
The Leafkin Avenger, the uncommon red-green 4/3 is really good because it taps for 2 to 3 mana and then just starts nugging the opponent. This deck's a little slower, but still does care about your life total. Yeah, and that's the last deck.
I've been actually pretty impressed by that deck. The lower card common or the lower curve commons are pretty good. Truffle Snout's been pretty good. Pride Malkin's pretty decent in that deck. And then the thing that I think it's easy to overlook are just the payoffs are pretty sweet. Like Gnarled Sage, that's the 5 mana 4/4 with reach, is pretty solid. And it feels funny to say it, but Colossal Dreadmaw is just very big. It dodges all of the red removal outside of the X spell level and the uncommon, but all the common red removal doesn't hit it. And it's big. It just is hard. You know, it's hard to kill. It's hard to triple block or whatever. And if you can power it out a turn early, it's like a problem, right? And, you know, I think that's kind of the focal point here. The times when I've really been impressed by the deck are when it put out even a you know, kind of run of the mill common like Colossal Dreadmaw turn or two early, and also had Leafkin Avenger, because I felt like I can't kill all of your creatures, and this one's going to kill me on the ground, but then I can't kill your Avenger, and that's going to kill me the way that you said, where it just sits there and starts pounding your face for 4 or whatever. And that's when I found it impressive. So I would put this one kind of on that, like, not quite as hard to get as the Red-Black Sacrifice deck, but not a really common based deck like some of the ones that I've really liked, like the blue-red spells, for example.
Yeah, but you know, having both Uprising and Furious Rise and Leafkin Avenger all as like pretty solid enablers, plus the fact that the base strategy of this deck is a lot more individually powerful cards. A red-black sack deck, when you draw a Witch's Cauldron and not a threaten, it can just be putrid, right?
Yes.
In the red-green deck, if you draw Pteranodon and you draw Truffle Snout and you draw, you know, a Colossal Dreadmaw and a Scorching Dragonfire, it's like,
you're playing Magic.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
You got to play a bunch of creatures, you know?
No, that's true. Yep.
And then the next 5 archetypes I feel are a little more on the controlling side. The blue-green draw 2 deck is controlling in the sense that it's not trying to curve out, but is utilizing Rousing Read on like a Lore Scale Quaddle or a Colossal Dreadmaw, even using Llanowar Visionaries and Trousing Pteranodons to survive and ramp, and then just playing a lot of high quality cards. Like I end up with, this is another deck, the blue-green deck, where I end up in because I, you know, opened a Sublime Epiphany and then got past, you know, Llanowar Visionaries, which is a pretty nice combo, or you get the Lore Scale Quaddle. It's not a deck that I think is completely common based, because the green and blue kind of interaction is not at its peak. This is one of the least interactive color pairs. It does have, you know, it has Hunter's Edge and Capture Sphere, but these are these are a little bit slower, and Roman Ghostlight. These are all fine cards. But I think the deck leans a little bit more on the controlling side, though can be quite good. I think blue green has legs. I
haven't had it yet. I'm going to have to report back on that one, because I'm interested in it, but you know, I don't know if it's just early biases or what. I mean, I really do try to push into different colors early, but I have not yet had that deck, and I've drafted quite a few times. So,
I mean, I've drafted a lot, and I would say probably a quarter of my drafts are blue-red spells. So
I agree. That's how I feel too.
That's a lot, you know. And that also has to do with how people are valuing cards, because you know, the blue-red spells decks really want crash throughs and ops, and these are cards that a lot of people are going to undervalue if they like listen to set reviews and they hear how bad these cards are. So no, but seriously, these cards are a little innocuous and have been printed a lot of times, and this is just about the best they've ever been. So, you know, unsurprisingly, we've kind of like latched onto that, and then if we're still getting past these cards, we're going to keep playing them. So after blue-green draw 2, you've got green-black sack. So this is the, you know, Vine Trellis, Twin Blade Assassins, Sabertooth Mauler, green-black removal deck that is on the controlling side. You're trying to stabilize with using Grasp and Finishing Blow and the Sage to just keep your opponent at bay, and then kill them with whatever giant monster you either have or assemble based on synergy. Yeah, Rise Again can be good in this deck too.
Yeah, funny. Drowsing Pteranodon is good in this deck too, but you actually play it to block. Like it just like maybe you'll attack with
Pteranodon is just a fantastic card.
Yeah, so, yeah, it's just a different role for it.
Pretty controlling. It's not really looking to curve out and beat you down. One of the problems I've had with this deck is you're not great against the blue-red spells deck, and you're also not great against Teferi's Tutelage, which is a card we'll talk about later.
Yeah.
Even slower, black-white life gain control. This is kind of, you know, utilizing the card advantage aspects of the life gain deck. Again, this is a little bit of an asterisk because I haven't completely wrapped my mind around what this is supposed to look like, because it hasn't come together very often for me. So this one might not be super real.
So I've had one successful build with this archetype, though it was really heavily black-based control with some good white controlling elements too, some removal and some powerful white cards. The life gain aspect was not really on the radar.
Yeah.
Wasn't a big part of it.
And then blue red spells control is also again not super fast, and your opponent's not going to know which blue red spells version you are. But the controlling deck, this is the one where you have multiple copies of Experimental Overload / Shipwreck Dowser to get spells back. You are playing Reign of Revelation, even Read the Tides, multiple Vidalian Arcanists to help cast your expensive spells, cancel, rewind, as many Dragonfires and Shocks and cantrips as you can get, and you often finish the game with like something like Teferi's Tutelage. That's a reason to be in this deck. Double Vision, I've actually gotten to work, the double your spells card.
Oh, yeah. And by the way, what did it take an hour for somebody to send us Double Vision on that blue bomb?
On Surviving Epiphany, yeah. That was pretty good. And they even got to counter a triggered ability there too. And this deck, this deck actually doesn't mind playing like a Spined Megalodon to try to close things out. And if it doesn't have something like a Tutelage or a Double Vision. And yeah, this deck's not really pressuring you. This is the deck with a lot of defensive Spellgorger weirds. You've got your 5/5 and they've got like a 3/3 and you're like, yeah, I'll just chill. Like, I've got lots of ways to draw cards. I don't need to trade 5 for 3.
Yeah.
And then on the I think the slowest though, I think the last, basically all the control decks are about the same amount of slow, is the blue-black Reanimator deck, which actually is capable of some fast draws. If you are able to rise again on turn 4 thanks to an Arcanist, you can pressure your opponent significantly. But this is the deck looking to assemble big creatures. The best one to reanimate, I think,
is the
outside
whale?
of like rares.
I have the whale.
Well, the whale's a rare, a pursued whale.
No, that's not that whale, the other whale.
The Waker of the Waves?
Yeah. Or is that a Leviathan or something?
Yeah, that's
the
best card overall. It's the 7 mana 7/7. All your opponent's creatures get -1/-0. But the broken part about this card is it puts itself in the graveyard. You can discard it to cast your little look at 2, put 1 in your hand, the other in the graveyard.
That has been the best one in my mind. Yeah.
Oh, it's because it's a 1-card combo with Rise Again. Like it doesn't need anything else. It's not a 3-card combo. I guess a 2-card combo.
Right.
And of course, Waker of Waves also stops your opponent from killing you pretty effectively. You put this out against red-white, and they're in a heap of trouble.
Yes.
And so it's looking to reanimate. This and Gormand are the two better like uncommon payoffs. Pursued Whale at rare is obviously great. I actually played a Baneslayer Angel in a blue-black deck once because
cool.
I had 7 discard outlets and 3 Rise Agains, and it was just great.
Because, that's great.
I mean, there's so many discard outlets. There's a Lurker, the 3/4. There's a Teferi's Protege, which loots. There's Rousing Reed, which loots. Like there are a lot of ways to get cards into the graveyard. Obsessive Stitcher at uncommon. Like this deck is well supported. Having the Zombify Rise Again be at common really makes this deck pop. And this deck adds a lot to the format. I think it's really cool how often you can actually make this kind of synergy deck work.
It's definitely my favorite deck of the ones that I've...
Carrion Grub mills you for 4. That card's great.
Yeah,
it's like a 4-mana awesome. 5/5, like...
Totally.
This deck, of course, very weak to Teferi's Tutelage, by the way.
Yeah. I did want to say there's... Oh, well, it's interesting. Yeah. So sometimes it helps, sometimes it hurts. One of the things that I did want to mention that I noticed, this is a pretty narrow thing, but it's something that gets talked about every once in a while, and particularly in core set. Liliana's Steward, right? This is the black 1/2. You can tap it and sack it. I was running a little low on discard outlets when I had 3 Rise from the Grave, like you said, and I had I had 2 Gormans and stuff. So I was ready to go, but I needed ways to get stuff in the yard, and Liliana's Steward doesn't do that. And it's target opponent discards a card, this is a complaint that you'll hear from old school Magic players, that the game has been dumbed down a little bit, where there's a lot of this type of, like this card, if it had been printed 15 years ago or whatever, would have said target player discards a card. Now it's like, well, we want to make it easier. So if you activate it and there's only one opponent, it just auto targets it, and that's one less click on Arena or whatever. So it makes sense to do it that way. But man, these are the little moments where I would much prefer to have the old, like this would just add a neat little extra dimension if I could discard a card, if I could waste my Liliana Steward, where like Mind Rot's in the set, and that was printed back in that time. And I feel like they would print it now that says target opponent discards 2 cards, but Mind Rot does say target player discards 2 cards. And, if I keep drafting this deck like I have been, I bet you I'll Mind Rot myself once over the course of the format.
Oh, I've had that come out too.
Yeah.
Like the where I wanted the steward to do the exact thing you're describing, and it didn't, which was kind of funny.
Yeah. Okay. But anyway, that is my favorite deck in the format so far. Not close. I've really enjoyed the Reanimator
It's
deck.
a lot of fun.
Yeah.
It really does come together nicely, and it's not unbeatable or anything when it does. And sometimes you reanimate a spined Megalodon on turn 5 and your opponent's just in a lot of trouble. Sometimes they just have enough pressure to go around what you're doing, or you're not able to attack, or you just don't get the right curve out and you draw a spined Megalodon, rise again, and no discard outlet. So it's not a guarantee in any way. But
I definitely do my fair share of losing with it, but I do enjoy it.
But by my estimation of these 12 archetypes, even if you're not sure where black, white, and red, black line up, there's something like seven on the more aggressive side and 5 on the more defensive side. So
yeah,
I think that's a that about sounds right. And overall in the format, I think you should be prepared to face aggression. I want to go over the top commons of each color and talk a little about them. For white, Basri's Acolyte, number 1.
Yep.
Not even close to being close. Just great in all the white decks, whether it's flyers, red-white beats, green-white beats, or black-white even, because putting counters on your lifelinkers is awesome. Mm-hmm. And it's a lifelinker itself. So, and then Feat of Resistance. This is the 1 and a white, give a creature pro anything and a +1/+1 counter. This card is just fantastic. It makes you, first of all, you should play your spells on your turn if your white opponent's tapped out. If you've got Finishing Blow or if you've got Scorching Dragonfire, these cards are instants, but don't try to go for the little 2-for-1 unless you have real reason to think they don't have feet or you really need that extra edge. Because in general, if they have a 3/2 flyer, you should just kill it now. Don't try to wait for them to equip it or something, because if you get blown out by feet, it's just such a big deal. Yep. Plus, Feat of Resistance is a finisher too. When they have 3 green blockers and you're just like, Feat of Resistance, my thing, attack you for 5, after giving it pro green. Very good.
Yep.
And for third, I like Gale Swooper. It's a 4-mana 3/2 flyer that gives another creature flying. I think that it's the right combination of does something right away and puts a persistent late game threat into play. So when you stabilize against red-white with your blue-black deck and they go Gale Swooper, make my 3-power creature flying, attack you for 3, and then they have a 3/2 flyer in play, it's like, damn, this puts actually a lot of pressure on.
It does. Interesting to note here, by the way, no removal in the top 3. And also white's removal, not very good in this set, right? There's no pacifism at common or anything. The 2 main ones are Swift Response and Secure the Scene. And Secure the Scene has been way too slow for the format. And Swift Response has been pretty good. That's a card you can put in a deck, but it's not well placed because a lot of these white decks are aggressive themselves. And, you'd like to be able to remove a blocker and then attack where Swift Response only kills tapped creatures. So it works better in a control shell, of which, that's maybe just that black-white deck that we mentioned before.
It's actually a kind of funny effect that has is if you draft a controlling white deck, you end up with a lot of Swift Responses, more than you would have expected. Because the card performs worse in most white decks. But in the decks that want it, which is black-white and blue-white primarily, it can be really sweet. But yeah, I think the 4th best white common is Anointed Chorister, the 1/1 lifelink that pumps for 5 mana. That's where I'm at on white right now.
It might be worded battlements, or we're talking about this very not what you would expect stuff for sure.
Yeah. And white is just very aggressive, as you can see by these commons.
Very.
White's the least flexible color, I think, in that it's just so much of its power is in the aggression. Though it is possible to draft white-based control decks. One of the first deck I actually 3-0'd with on Magic Online was a Mardu Shrines deck that had 4 Swift Responses and 3 Deathspore Thalids and 2 Grasp of Darkness. And I just sat there and killed all my opponent's stuff and eventually shrined them out.
Wow, that's sweet.
For blue, the best common, Roman Ghostlight. I think that card is just, the 5-mana 3/2 flyer that bounces. This is great in aggro and good in control. Just good overall. It's a card. It's also a 5-drop that you can't have really too many of because each one puts you a little ahead. So even when you're behind, you can go Ghostlight, bounce your biggest thing, block your next thing. Next turn, Ghostlight, bounce your big and eventually you're ahead. You turn the tide completely. Mm-hmm. I have Mistral Singer as the 2nd best blue common, the 2/2 flying prowess for 3.
Sure.
It's great in aggressive decks. It's actually fine in defensive ones because the blue decks have a lot of instants. If your opponent goes turn 3 Mistral Singer, you attack your 2/2s into it, they take it. They turn 4, play their 4th land and pass. What are you expecting when you attack back into them? They're going to have something. And so maybe you don't attack and then they just end of turn cast Reign of Revelation, or they cast a Capture Sphere when you went to attacks or what have you. So I like Mistral Singer a lot, and this might be controversial, but I have Opt as the third best blue common. I just find that
you have that over Capture Sphere here.
I have that over Rousing Read, which then I have over Capture Sphere.
Okay, cool. That's what I was wondering. Okay, so what are your thoughts on Opt?
Those are the next two, so if the top five would round those out. But I find the blue decks want as many Opts as they can get. They're excellent in blue-red spells. They're quite good in the blue-green draw too, though that deck has slightly fewer payoffs. And even in like something like blue-white flyers or blue-black, they're okay. But it's really mainly on the strength. This kind of reflects how good blue-red spells is. Opt is a high priority card for blue-red spells. Blue-red spells is the best blue deck, might be the best deck overall. So therefore I have Opt as a high common. The cool thing about this set is that 6 picks in, these common lists can change quite a bit. Like Ghostlight's going to be the best one, but I've had decks that would easily take Capture Sphere or Rousing Read over Mistral Singer and Opt. It just depends what you're trying to accomplish. And that's the sign of a good format.
Yeah. But Opt bumping up is definitely the thing to take note of here, right? Because that is a card that has shifted significantly where you really will put 2 Opts in your deck. And most formats that Opt is in, you think you're going to play one and then you don't even end up playing the one. That's a big difference.
I'll play as many Opts as I can get. Like there's really not an upper bound when you've got 7 cards in your deck that care about you casting spells.
Yeah, for sure. It really matters. Yeah.
Yeah. For Black, Grasp of Darkness is unquestionably the best common. Like I don't think that's even close to being close. 2-mana removal is just too good. I've got Rise Again second. I think Rise Again is just so important to the black decks. Again, this changes dramatically once you're not in the Reanimator deck, which the black-green deck also can make use of it, but once you're somewhere else, Rise Again does go lower, but early I'm fine taking it. And then I have Deathbloom Thallid as 3 over, with Finishing Blow as 4th, but still just not a card I put a high priority on. 5-mana removals, not that good when they're pressuring you with 2-mana cards. It just isn't. You'd rather play a Deathbloom Thallid and keep their stuff away.
Yeah, and I found Finishing Blow to be frustratingly slow, and then there's many situations that pop up where it doesn't even work. It doesn't even do what you want. White always has that stupid dog on the battlefield, or the one you can sack to give a thing indestructible, or just stuff like where you're like, does this Finishing Blow at least exile? It's like, no, you're not even getting that for your 5 mana. And we talked about Feet of Resistance and Ranger's Guile and stuff too.
For red, probably not a big shocker here. Scorching Dragonfire, easily the best.
Definitely.
I really like Spellgorger Weird and the blue-red spells deck, so I have that second. And then
definitely,
I have Shock beating out the 4th best common, which I think is Crash Through.
You have Crash Through? Okay. Yeah.
I have Shock above Crash Through, but I have Crash Through above Turn to Slag. And Goblin Wizardry is another one, which I think is very good. I've actually been pretty impressed with Wizardry.
I have too. That card's been really impressive. But
Monastery Mentor?
Yeah, basically. The one that stands out, though, is Shock. Yeah. Right. Especially in a set that has Scorching Dragonfire at common, and Shock just kind of gets bumped down a little bit. And that hasn't been the case. Cheap ways, again, it's the deck that can empty their hand that wins most of the time in the format. And yes, it matters what spells you play to a point, but a card like Shock is well above the bar for that. And, it lets you do that, and it turns on all of your blue-red spell stuff and all the ways that you want to have those turned on. Yeah, it's just, it's that simple. I just can't tell you how many times I've just seen the player, whether it was me or my opponent, who was able to just deploy everything from their hand, win the game. And that's just going to put a premium on cards like Shock, where there's many formats where you're like, Shock's overall impact on the game isn't enough for me to actively pursue it. Like, you might play 1 or 0. You would rarely play 2. And here I would play 2 without question, especially in the right deck. So that says a lot. Again, this is all these signs are pointing to this format's fast. The thing that I want to make sure that we put a point on, though, is that it doesn't necessarily mean that all the decks are aggro decks. It means that the decks have the ability to deploy the things that they're trying to do in a quick fashion, and you need to be able to do that yourself.
Yeah, I mean, you can make a deck that's built around winning with Teferi's Tutelage and Reign of Revelation, but you need to have some shocks in that deck so that you don't just die.
Right.
Some shocks and Dragonfires to curve into.
Yeah.
Green, Llanowar Visioner, I think, is overall better than Drowsing Pteranodon, but I wouldn't be surprised if this flips at some point, and if you've already started to make inroads into something like green-white. I would take the Pteranodon over Visionary. But to start with, I mean, Visionary, I think in most green decks is going to be better. It's just a really, really powerful card.
Yeah, there's no scenarios where Visionary isn't good. That, it's a good way to look at it. It's just always good, even late game.
And in decks like green black or green red, it's critical that you get to cast your 4 and 5 mana spells, and this helps you do that.
Yep.
Where though Pteranodon does help you too. That's why these cards are kind of neck and neck. And then Hunter's Edge, I think, is a clear third. The put a ++1 counter and then bite your opponent's thing. You punch that. Also a good card. I'm never really unhappy to play this card, but the first two I think are just a cut above. Green got really good commons this time around.
It did indeed.
So. That's kind of how I view the top commons. And again, it's biased by the decks that I think are good. But of course, that's the whole point. I mean, right. the decks that are good change your common pick order. So I like where those at right now. I don't actually see those changing a ton, though they've changed a lot this week. But we'll see how things play out. Want to take a look at a underrated, overrated, properly rated, basically just single card discussion here. I put a bunch of cards in here. Going to kick things off with Anointed Chorister, the 1 mana 1/1 lifelink. You can pay 5 mana to give it +3/+3 to an turn. Kind of as we already mentioned, we already brought it up. This card's very good.
Yes.
It's a card that I expect most white decks to be happy playing like 2. You probably don't want the third because once you have multiple in play, it gets a little dicey. But it ends up making your pump spells like Basri's Acolyte or Short Sword better. And then at some point you can attack and your opponent's just unable to block it in the middle of the game. And the fact that it has lifelink means it works with life gain cards, but also means you're not losing the race. Because one of the things about creatures that pump like this, imagine that we're both playing aggressive decks. Like you're playing red-white aggro and I'm playing blue-white flyers. If you attacked with this and I took it, if it didn't have lifelink, you're almost never going to spend your turn pumping because you're going to pump. I'm going to take 4, and then I'm going to attack you back, and you didn't get to play anything that turn. But with lifelink, that just changes the equation so much. All of a sudden, you're like, no, I'm just going to spend my turn pumping this. I'm going to hit you for 4 lifelink, and that blunts your next attack. So it's like I kind of got to play something to the board in the sense that I negated your last attack, and you're just down a bunch of life. So I think that the Chorister really delivers. It's enough of the total package is good enough.
Okay.
The next one is cards I know you're going to hate playing. Dub, the +2/+2 and first strike. Fur of the Bitten that gives it a +2/+2 must attack. And then Short Sword, the equipment that gives ++1 for 1 and equips 1. You know what? There are decks that just play all these cards. And Drowsing Pteranodon loves to see them.
Yep.
Seasoned Hallowblade, the 3/1 uncommon that you can discard a card to make indestructible. Once I have that card, I'm actively looking for ways to pump it up because turn 2 Hallowblade, turn 3 Dub is incredibly hard to beat.
It is. Yeah. You need to have what's it called? Grasp, or you're basically dead. Yeah.
Or Capture Sphere, but against, like, you play against a red-green deck, they're probably dead. So these cards go from being F/D level cards to I think being like C level cards in the red aggressive decks, which is a pretty big bump.
Do you think they're good generally?
No, they're good in specific decks. They're good in aggressive decks. But the thing is, if you had no Feat of Resistances or no of the 1 mana 1/1 dog that sacks to protect your things, if you didn't have any copies of those, I would be resistant to playing the auras in my deck. Because there's enough removal or bounce that you're just asking to get 2 for 1. But, getting to go 2-drop into 3-drop into turn 4, put like Fear of the Bitten on one of your creatures, have Feat of Resistance up, that's going to be pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, I often take a stance with cards like this that are pretty sketchy on, you beat me with them. Like, I'll lose to them a few times and then I'll kind of join the club, but I'll make my opponents beta test these cards for me. And I'm kind of creeping towards maybe I should be playing these. Like, I have lost to them. They do pose a very weird thing on the game. When somebody goes like turn 2, 2-drop, turn 3 Dub, hits you, and then they say go, it's like, if you untap and kill the thing, you probably win. And if you don't, you're in big trouble. It puts an immense pressure on you. So, missing land drops and all that kind of stuff gets super punished. Cards that don't do anything, you're like, oh yeah, Teferi's Tutelage, go, and they're like, cool, take 5 more, right? These type of scenarios, just amplify that. But I'm actually starting to lean towards this might just be a real deck in the format, given the ways you can protect, because I have lost to it a few times and I'm kind of going, maybe that's just a real thing, Again, it kind of goes along with what I was saying about dumping your hand. Like, even if there's just these cards,
the strongest evidence I really can point to these cards being solid in this format is that Marshall's willing to entertain the ability of putting them in his deck, though he will not be actually putting them in his deck.
What's the next one?
Swift Response. We kind of already covered that earlier, which most white decks don't actually want this card. I expect to see it going pretty late. Staunch Shieldmate's the 1-mana 1/3, and it just turns out there's enough ways to pump things, especially with Basri's Acolyte, that I really have liked Staunch Shieldmate, and I think it's a playable card.
So you think it's also underrated a little?
I think it's a little underrated, yeah.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
I also think that you can play this and sometimes it'll blank their 2-drop until you pump this up, which means it's even accomplishing something on the board. Mm-hmm. Next is Enthralling Hold. This is the 3 blue.
I want to know what you think about this. Yeah.
So there's this thing that happens when a card is like a card that looks like an old card. In this case, Mind Control, which has been a limited like all-star. Mm-hmm. And this one has a drawback. You can only take tapped creatures. Mm-hmm. People overcorrect, and I feel that that's what's happening right now. Yes. I've seen a number of people talk about how this card is bad and how you should be taking random commons over it, and how this card's not good in the format. And what they're really saying, or the way I interpret it, is this card's worse than Mind Control, and I'm punishing it for it.
Yes, that's how I feel too.
And the answer is yes, it is worse than Mind Control.
Yes.
But you know what? It's also really good. So I caution you to kind of overcorrect, because there's also this urge to be like, you think the Mind Control is good, but I know it's not good. I have that, like, here's the real truth. Mm-hmm. And the truth is, if Mind Control is a 10, this card's closer to like a 7 than it is to a 9. It's not a little worse. It's actually a lot worse. Mm-hmm. But it's still very good. When you land Enthralling Hold on your opponent's creature, you get a significant advantage out of it.
Yeah, and exactly. It's easy to focus on the times when that's not so great, but there's times when that's completely game breaking.
And you know what? I've won drafts with this, and I've lost games to this, and I think the card is still quite good. And yeah, look, in the world where everyone just curves out and has all 2-drops, this card is pretty weak, because taking a tapped 2-drop that already hit you multiple times and can't even block this turn isn't great. There's enough decks in the format that play large-sized creatures that you're going to be able to land this on something decent most of the time. So
yeah,
I like Enthralling Hold. Yeah, look, common bounce spells like Roman Ghostlight make it worse, that's for sure. But it's still a good card. I would still take this card fairly high.
Yeah, don't overcorrect. You do want to correct, yes, and that is definitely appropriate, but don't overdo it. Yeah.
Lofty Denial, so 1 and a blue, counter a spell unless they pay 1, but if you have a flyer, they have to pay 4. I've been pretty impressed with this card.
Same. It
really does do what you want it to do on turn 2 and 3 without having a flyer, and then on turn 6 when you have a flyer in play, it also works. So that's what I want from a counterspell. I want it to catch me up, which a 2-mana counter does. When you're on the draw and you counter their 3-drop, that does exactly what you want. And then later in the game, it can actually still counter real spells. So I like Lofty Denial. Mm-hmm. My biggest gripe with the set is this next card, Teferi's Tutelage. Mm-hmm. 2 and a blue enchantment. When it ETBs, you draw a card and discard a card. And whenever you draw a card, you mill the opponent for 2. Mm-hmm. This card just leads to non-games. I've both conceded on turn 3 and had opponents concede on turn 3 to this. When you're playing a blue-black Reanimator deck and they just play this on turn 3, sometimes you're like, I don't even know why I'm going to bother playing this game. I could reanimate my Spine Megalodon on turn 5 and still come 4 turns short of racing this. Mm-hmm. It just kills the opponent so fast. There's also so much card draw. There's Opt, there's Frantic Inventory, there's Reign of Revelation. Mm-hmm. Like there's
all
just
the looters.
Yeah, there's millions of looters. It's just a really easy card to win with and really uninteractive. I dislike the lack of interaction. So Tutelage is close to a bomb. I would take Tutelage very highly if I saw it, and just try to draft the deck that all it wants to do is draw cards and survive, which you might think I would enjoy. And
yes,
I kind of do.
That is kind of in your wheelhouse.
In general, I think this card doesn't make games more fun. So I don't love it.
Well, I have found it interesting, though, because I've been primarily playing Arena Premier Draft, so that's best of 1, the ranked ones. And the taking away the ability to kind of pivot your game plan away from something like this when your opponent's playing a very aggressive deck, or maybe one of the Dub Fear or the Bitten decks, or just a red-white aggro deck or whatever, it is way too slow for those. Like, you cannot take turn 3 off against those decks and not affect the board in a meaningful way. But it's best of one, so you're kind of locked in on it. And I do find it interesting. I think it actually backs up your point that the decks that it's really good against, it creates non-games. But the decks that it's bad against, it's really bad. Like, the whole deck is bad. Like, there's decks where if you went turn 3 Tutelage, turn 4 Reign of Revelation, they would go, I can never win this game. And there's decks where if you did that exact same thing, they're like, I can never lose this game. This player just spent 7 mana over 2 critical turns doing nothing. And now I'm going to win because I'm just beating them down. But either way, it leads to like, well, the game's over, I guess, with the turn that you played. It's kind of funny.
Yeah, it
is bad against the aggro decks, though. I mean, it is terrible.
It is, but it's also a fairly lean win condition where you don't really need a whole lot besides this to win. It's surprisingly good at that. So, yes, on turn 3, you should not play this against aggro, but the decks that really make use of this can still play solid defensive options.
Yeah, it's true. All right, what's next?
Finishing Blow in Turn to Slag, the 5-mana removal. I think we made our point on this, which is they're slow and not well positioned in this format. Malefic Scythe is next. So 1 and a black for equipment. You equip for 1, it gets +1/+1, and then every time the equipped creature dies, that increases. Yeah. So
it's cool. I like this card.
Yeah, I don't want to say it Sumazawa's Jite, but like, this card is pretty good.
You totally want to say that. I even played this in a control deck.
Really?
I did. I had a couple of the 1/1 lifelinkers that you can reanimate to become 5/5 demons.
Oh,
and I'm like,
Vessel, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm like, well, I want this thing to die anyway. And so I'll throw this thing in the deck, and I threw it, and it's on a lifelinker. If it gets even just 1 additional soul counter, so the creature's getting +2/+2, it turns your stupid 1/1 lifelinker into a 3/3 lifelink. That is a must kill for most of the decks in the format. And guess what? When they kill it, well, now it's a demon, right? And it gets a counter and stuff. I actually found it quite strong. Even in that setting, which is like really not what it was made for. So, yeah.
My favorite so far has been in the green-black deck where you're like equipping your Portcullis Vine with this, sacking it, draw a card. And then just moving it around. And yeah, Malefic Scythe just really it's one of the sacrifice cards I found to be actually pretty good.
Malefic Jite, yeah.
Rise Again, yeah, we love this card. It's well supported. Great, It's a great card. Definitely better than it first looked.
Yeah, well supported. That's a good way to put it.
Skeleton Archer is a nice one. 3 and a black, 3/3. When it ETBs, pings for 1. In a deck full of aggressive creatures, this card, or in a format rather full of aggressive creatures, Skeleton Archer does kind of bring exactly what you want to the table. Your opponent can get pretty boned by it when you play this and kill their 2/1 and hold their 2/2 back.
Yep, solid.
Crash Through and Opt, like we mentioned earlier, have gone up quite a bit in value. Fiery Emancipation is an interesting one. This is a mythic rare, 3 red. All your damage is tripled. We gave it an F, and that was a little bit too hasty. I've actually seen this card do some good work. It's expensive. It doesn't go in most decks or every deck, but it actually has a good enough effect on the game that you can use this as the high end. It's especially good with Goblin Arsonist. It's insane with Pitchburn Devils if you get that combo going.
That's
a 9/3 that then deals 9 when it dies.
Okay, yeah, that's actually pretty good.
And I saw someone use this plus the Shrine of Shattered Peaks, or the Sanctum of Shattered Peaks, the shrine that you can discard a land to deal 1, and so now you can discard a land to deal 3.
Shattered Heights, yeah.
Yeah, I found Fire Emancipation to be playable in the right deck. It's obviously a big commitment in a lot of ways, but if you think about it as an enchantment that just permanently gives all your creatures +5/+0, like that is actually good enough in a deck that has enough creatures in it. So,
okay, yeah, because I still wonder like if you compare it to like the uncommon 6/6 trampler that has some other stuff, but let's just say it's 5 and a red for a 6/6 trample. I wonder which deck wins more, the deck with Fiery Emancipation in it or the deck with that sort of dirtle in it.
Yeah, I mean it is.
I could see Emancipation stealing games that the other deck
could be the 6/6.
Yeah.
But my point isn't that this card is good as much as it's not an F. It's more like a C+ in the right deck, like build around C+, that sort of thing.
Okay.
It's not a good card. It's not I would never take this over like a removal spell, like a good removal spell or anything.
Okay.
Pitchburn Devils, despite its great combo with Fire Emancipation, I think is close to a D in this format. It's competing with a lot of cards at 5 mana. There's just a ton of 5-drops in the set. It doesn't interact well with like something like Capture Sphere or Faith's Fetters, though that's an uncommon. And the red-black sack deck just hasn't been that good. I have found Pitchburn Devil sits on the sideline more often than not.
I think that, you said that you said Rise Again is well supported, right? Pitchburn Devils, less so. It's a fine Magic card, but it doesn't, like, if the red-black sacrifice deck was better, because when I've seen it in that deck, I'm like, dang, like they could just throw around a lightning bolt whenever they want, and they can do some cool stuff. But yeah, I agree. It's not well supported, at least not in the way that like Rise Again is.
Pride Malkin is the 2 and a green with 2/1 that gives a ++1 counter to anything, and all your creatures with ++1 counters have trample.
Yeah. Should they just have made it a rule that you have to put it on the Pteranodon, or is that not?
Yeah, it's got Provoke.
Yeah.
Flag Bearer. Yeah, Pride Malkin is fine. I thought this card was going to be pretty bad, but it's actually been solid. It could the trample part really is the cherry on top, where sometimes you play this, give a counter to like a 4 or 5 power creature, and it really puts your opponent in a tough spot. And Truffle Snout is another one I found to be pretty good. The 2 and a green 2/2, and we thought this card was fine, but it really does support the +1/+1 counter themes nicely. And then I've definitely lost to this card gaining life in the right circumstances as well.
It's a lot of life, yeah.
Definitely underrated Obsessive Stitcher a little bit. Just again, it just has to do with the support. This archetype's so well supported that Obsessive Stitcher, the blue-black 0/3 uncommon for 1 blue-black, that you can tap it to loot or pay for it and tap and sack it to reanimate. It's a 1-card combo in the sense that it does the discarding and the reanimating all by itself. All you need is the fatty. So
this is the one that you gave an F and I gave like a B. Is that accurate? Just
Marshall's still bitter over the off-gate.
No, yeah, off-gate is definitely like weighing on my mind.
I mean, the reality is you said Opto's like a C in this set, a D in most sets. You don't usually get to play it. And then someone tweeted at us that Luis was definitely right about Opt and the card is great. And
was I ready to rescind my position?
And now that is translated into me saying that Marshall has given Opt an F in every opportunity. So, and then the last card I want to talk about is Chrome Replicator, 5 mana 4/4. And ETBs, you get another 4/4 if you have a double of any non-token permanent. I found actually, I had a deck with 2 Furious Rise I made a video with, and I didn't Chrome Replicator when I had 2 Furious Rises because I didn't realize that it actually counts enchantments as well. But there's enough redundancy in a triple core set draft where I found Replicator can make a 4/4 like a solid amount of the time, and 5 mana for 2 4/4s is such an absurdly good deal that it's worth taking the effort. Plus a 5 mana 4/4, that's not a bad fail case. That still puts a creature onto the board.
Perfectly acceptable. Yeah, I have found the same thing. The Replicator is just a lot of punch. And when you break things down to core set levels, right, a couple of things kind of pop up having drafted core set again. One of them is, raw power matters, right? Like cards like Colossal Dreadmaw go a lot further in decks like these because it's just a lot of power and toughness. What's the Hellkite, the uncommon for 7 or 5 red, like that type of card is just like, well, crap, that thing's freaking huge and it's going to beat me up. And yeah, there is a decent amount of synergy in this core set, as you mentioned at the onset of the show, but also just sometimes raw power matters. And Chrome Replicators like here's 2 4/4s, right? That's just a big deal. The other thing that comes to mind drafting the core set is that while there is a decent amount of synergy here, really they did a good job of like weaving in a lot of synergistic stuff. It always is a good reminder that Magic has such a good fundamental base of interesting strategic decisions that we focus so much on like mutate or, whatever the hot new mechanic is as being kind of the interesting thing. But it turns out that the interesting thing is just new cards, and you don't actually need to have those. I'll take them. I love having all the neat new mechanics that they come up with and figuring out how they work. It's a cool wrinkle, but that's actually not what keeps me coming back to Magic. And every time a core set comes out, I realize that it's like, all right, this player is attacking me, right? They're 3-3 into my 4-4. Here's this is interesting, right? Like they could have a combat trick. Do I care? Where is this game going? And, running all the scenarios and figuring stuff out in your head. And it's like, this is just bread and butter magic. There's nothing, it's do they have it or not type scenario. And, that to me is plenty enough, fascinating, so the fact that they're able to weave in a bunch of synergies, I'll definitely take it. Like it makes these core sets, way cooler. I actually did a episode of Outside Notes last week with Graham Stark, and he said something that was like, yeah, he's actually right. He's like, how many times do we need to say when a core set comes out, well, this is actually pretty interesting for a core set, or there's actually a lot going on for a core set. And it's kind of like, there just is now, right? Like they've figured that out somehow. I don't know.
Yeah. I think that's a good point.
I prefer the not core sets, but I like core sets.
I tend to prefer expert level sets, but I like core sets more than I think the average invested player does.
Yeah, same. All right, you want to call it there, Luis? Call it a show?
Yeah, it seems good to me.
Yeah, that was good stuff. We'll be going over archetypes more in depth in the coming weeks, as well as doing crack a draft and walking you through a full draft and in video form here on the show as well. As we'll make it audio accessible too. So lots to look forward to here for M21. That is going to do it for the show this week. If you want to find us on social media, I'm Marshall_LR and Luis is LSV. You can find all things related to the podcast at lrcast.com. You can check out our sponsor, Channel Fireball, at channelfireball.com. And there's a link in the show notes for CFB Pro, where you can get access to articles from The Calculator, Christian Calcano. There's also Alex Cordo Calls on the free side on Channel Fireball as well. If you want to get the in-depth early look at M21 draft, it's another opinion. It's always good to have as many opinions as you can get on these type of things. And there's another one for you for free right there on Channel Fireball. That's going to do it for this one. We'll see you next week.
All right, Marshall, what is the meal you most want to get that you're not able to get right now? Whether that's from a specific place you can't go to, or just the kind of meals not really accessible when we're mostly staying at home.
I want Hattie B's so bad, Louise. I found a couple of places around here that are pretty darn good, and so I'm fine. But I normally would have been to Las Vegas at some point, during the course of this year, just for a quick trip or maybe a work thing or something. And I would have, because that's the closest Hattie B's to here. And that's the one I'm dying for.
Oh, yeah. That still reminds me of the time we went to Hattie B's and you told me I could get whatever I want. You were going to pay for my meal. And I also at checkout, I also added a Hattie B's shirt.
Yeah, you did. I'm like, wow, this place is expensive. And then you just had a shirt in your hand. I'm like, what is going on? The good news is you wore that shirt. That was, wanted that shirt. That wasn't just to troll me. I was like, no, look, if you're going to wear it, I'm happy to buy you a shirt.
I need to find it because you can tell Hattie B's is good because of how often I get comments on that shirt. If I ever wore it to a convention or tournament, I'd have multiple people yeah, Hattie B's. And when I wore it on stream, same thing. So that I've definitely gotten good value out of that shirt considering what I paid for it.
I guess I have to then.
I think the meal that I most want to have that I can't right now is conveyor belt sushi. There's actually a pretty good conveyor belt sushi place here in Denver, and I'm not really down for that right now, So
that does seem not ideal.
but it's so cool, just getting to see the sushi in front of you and just I can just take whatever I want off this conveyor belt. It's awesome. So definitely looking forward to that. And you know what? There's plenty of cool stuff we can do and eat now, but yeah, it's going to be nice when, and I guess that does happen. I'm not going to say if, but when we get back to
I like the optimism. I like it.
Yeah.